All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll call this joint meeting to order. Before we go too far, though, I want to call on Chairman McCall to give a prayer for us. Chairman McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you for another beautiful day that you've given us. Please be with all of us when we make decisions, especially on things that affect other people as to where some of these road projects may go. Thank you for being with us, and please take care of us and the state of Georgia. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Chairman McCall. Well, I want to welcome all of our new House members to this first meeting, joint meeting with the Senate Transportation Committee. Chairman Beach and I, we work on a lot of tough issues together, and we worked on some tough issues last year together that are important to our state. So I appreciate his friendship and his leadership in the Senate. And for the new members to the Transportation Committee in the House, I want to welcome you to this meeting. In House Bill 170, one of the things that we passed in that legislation that Chairman Roberts and Senator Gooch were instrumental in putting in was that there had to be a 10-year plan presented by GDOT to these two committees, and that 10-year plan had to be approved on an annual basis by this committee. So what Chairman Beach and I try to do on an annual basis is get together as a group, so GDOT only has to present it to us one time. On your table, you should have a thumb drive because there's a whole lot of information and a lot of backup information that goes along with this. So instead of killing too many trees, we decided to do it on thumb drive, and we appreciate GDOT providing that to us and Josh for his assistance. Take this because we're not voting today after they present. There's time for questions. If you have concerns, get with Josh. He can arrange to make sure the right person answers that. And for those of you who don't know, Josh Waller, let people see you there. Josh is our point of contact with the Georgia Department of Transportation. So anything you need, he's got the answers to that, and he can help direct you to the right path. So again, welcome to this committee meeting, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Chairman B.
Well, thank you, Chairman Tanner, and thank you for your leadership and the leadership of this whole committee. Thank you all for all your hard work on the past bills we've passed. And I will tell you, when we go to SLC, the Southern Leadership Conference, and we talk to other states, they're envious of what Georgia's doing. They want to know what we're doing and how we're doing it, and we've been the model. And I also want to thank GDOT and our planning director, former Representative Roberts. Thank y'all for what y'all do. You do a great job. And I want to also just give you a little shout out. Y'all did a great job during the Super Bowl. I heard of no problems, no traffic incidents, and y'all did a great job preparing for that and working with the other agencies. And that's one of the things, y'all have heard me say this before, one of the things I'm most proud of in the transportation world, in the transportation arena, is how GDOT's working with Greta and CERTA and ARC and MARTA and the new ATL, and everybody's pulling together to do what's best for the citizen and the customer, very customer-centric, and we really appreciate your leadership, Commissioner, and look forward to hearing the 10-year plan. And we're here to just help you in any way we can to make sure we're increasing mobility and decreasing congestion and working on what's best. And I know we're going to be talking about Chairman Tanner, I'm going to be working on a Freight Logistics Commission. We'll talk a little more about that, and you may even mention that today, but that's the next component to really make sure we have a holistic transportation plan. So with that, thank you, and Chairman Tanner, back to you.
Thank you. And just to echo that, thank you for GDOT and all the hard work, Commissioner, for all you do, and Jay. And at this time, we'll turn it over to you. And if you would, most of us know who you are, but for those members who are new, please just introduce yourself to them, and we'll go ahead and get started.
I'm Russell McMurray, the Commissioner for Georgia DOT.
Jay Roberts, Director of Planning, Georgia Department of Transportation.
So what we're going to do today is sort of jump in and talk about really sort of three things. Well, obviously the 10-year plan and sort of the inputs and the processes that ends up developing the 10-year plan. But as you both mentioned, as you have a commission going forward, and both House and Senate has a resolution to talk about freight, I want to spend a little bit of time with freight to maybe get you in that mindset as you go forth from this session and do some work as we focus on freight and the importance of freight to Georgia. So share a little bit about information with you there, and then wrap up with some helpful information, if you will. Obviously, that thumb drive's got more information on it than you'd ever want to probably read at one time. But it's a wealth of information there, and we'll talk about that. But first, I wanted to announce we're very excited because this Friday we were contacted from the United States Department of Transportation that they wanted to come to Georgia to focus on infrastructure. And the Undersecretary of Transportation will be visiting Savannah Friday. I know it's a legislative day, but we'll be down to do a project visit on Jimmy DeLoach Parkway, a project that is a county-funded project, a state-funded project, and a federally funded project. And then spend some time in a roundtable discussion at the ports with Georgia Ports Authority, with GDOT, and a lot of our colleagues, especially the railroads, the freight industry, the construction industry, and a lot of public elected officials like Industrial Development Authority. So we're very excited to have the Undersecretary come into Georgia, and it's the administration's focus on transportation infrastructure, which was alluded to last night in the State of the Union. So sort of a fast-breaking announcement. This came together very quick, but just sort of wanted you to know that. And we're very honored that the USDOT chose Georgia to be one of the states that they visit to have a conversation on infrastructure. So let's get started. If you flip over on 2, I'll just start again with where the dollars come from and a little bit of 101 of federal and state funding. If you look at the state side, obviously excise, 27.6 per gallon, or 30.8 for diesel is excise. On the federal side of the ledger, the federal excise is 18.4 cents, last adjusted in 1993, which means it has about 50% of the buying power it did back in 93. And I'll come back to the federal piece in a minute. But as you look down the list, you can see all the different things that are the components of what bring funding to Georgia, be it federal or state. And just a reminder that we administer both the Federal Aviation Administration funds, about $45 million in federal funds there, and Federal Transit Administration funds, about $47 million there for rural non-urban transit providers. So that's not MARTA, that's not Greta, but our mid-sized cities and rural transit. So just again, those are sort of all the flavors of funding. On the next slide, on 3, is what comes right out of the budget is, okay, what those fund sources, what does that turn into the revenue? And bottom line for amended FY19 on the state side, $2.1 billion. And you can see a breakdown of where those revenues come from. On the FY20 budget that will be presented later, what we presented earlier at Joint Appropriations, $2.119 billion. So it increases a little bit over FY19, which is positive. And again, these are the sources and the totals of funds. Over on the next slide, on slide 4, gives us an analysis of how the state and the federal look together. And I can tell you that this graph used to look a lot different back before 2015, where we were solely dependent on federal, and now you can see the federal share is only about 38%. So having additional state funds gives us a little more autonomy and a little more flexibility in how to be strategic to utilize our dollars. So good to see how that sort of breaks down. On slide 5, I want to spend a little time on this one. But this is the federal funding and budget programs. So just similar to our state budget that is program-based, the federal transportation budget, which for Georgia, our what they call obligation authority, or the ability to get reimbursed for federal dollars, is $1.237 billion, so $1.2 billion. But the good old federal program, we have to remember, is a federal reimbursable program, meaning that Georgia has to expend the money first, send the bill to Washington, and get reimbursed. Generally, that works very seamlessly on a weekly basis. We make requests and get reimbursed. And I'll come back to when I say generally with the caveat. The other part about that is it's an 80-20 match. So if we send $1 up for reimbursement, they send us back 80 cents generally. Most all the federal programs are 80-20 match. So, and then the complicated part of that is each federal authorization act, the current one that we're under is called the FAST Act, has all these budget programs you see on this slide. So there's really like 11 main budget programs and then sub-programs under that. So you don't just get $1 of federal money that goes into one bucket. The federal money has to be allocated across the different buckets, and they sort of prescribe the funding allocation in each of the buckets. So that's important to remember as we develop plans and as we talk about 10-year plans. We have to marry up state dollars with federal dollars, and I'll come back to that as well. One of the important things that we need to remember, and it was again alluded to last night in the State of the Union, was the need for coming together on infrastructure federally. And that's because the federal transportation bill expires September of 2020. So we're in that last federal fiscal year in about a half of the current bill ending. And I have to remind you too that there's a real void. It's about 30% of the budget for transportation funding comes from general fund because the highway trust fund, that 18.4 cents, is no longer sustainable. And so there's a big cliff that sort of is on the horizon beginning next year federally that Congress will have to act to figure out how to bring in additional revenue to stay at least status quo. So that gives us some concerns, and we'll tell you what our assumptions are we built into the 10-year plan, because obviously the 10-year plan goes past the federal funding bill that is in place. Just for instance, another 6-year bill would require an additional $114 billion just to maintain the current level. So billion, that's hard to say, but that's a big amount. And so the other thing that I just give a little cautionary tale to in the current bill that ends next September is something called a rescission of $7.6 billion nationally. And that's where basically if you don't use all your money in one of these buckets in 1 year, the money or the promise of money stays there that you could go back the next year and use. It's not additive, so if you don't spend the money this year, you don't get more money next year, but they give you the ability to do that, to go back and use those dollars. And sometimes in all these buckets, you know, projects don't come out every year the way you want. What that means to Georgia is we may have to, quote, give back or give up, not give back, but give up about $190 million next July. That's significant money. So I can tell you we're advocating to Congress, our members, other state DOT members are advocating to Congress that we don't need for this rescission to happen. This was something that was sort of common practice in years past, and it really didn't hurt too much, but now it's down to where it's really would have a negative impact. So we'll just keep that in front of you. On the next slide, let me move into when I said how things generally
Could I
work.
ask you a question?
You bet.
So if a state doesn't use that money in that bucket and it gets sent back to Washington, and another state has a need for that bucket of money, can you try to get that money allocated? Let's say Arkansas doesn't use $50 million for one of the buckets, and we want to we need money for that bucket. Can we try to get that money from the Arkansas budget not being used? Am I making sense?
Yeah, great question, Chairman. Two different things. The answer is every year we try to expend all our federal dollars on our state budget year, because federal highway toward the end of the budget year, usually in August, they will look at states that have not spent or is going to authorize all their funds, and they'll sweep it back, and then we make application for it. So last year, I think we received about $90 million from other states that could not spend it. The rescission is different than that. That money just goes away. So that's a way to be in budgetary compliance at the federal level. So it's a little different.
Okay.
But the answer to your question is yes, that happens, and Georgia always benefits. I know 2 years ago we were we were the state that got the most money back. Texas beat us last year. A little bit defensive about that, but we'll try better. We'll try harder this year to try to beat Texas again.
Thank you.
So on this one, though, I just wanted, again, in the context of being here today and 10-year plan and living in a continuing resolution that goes to February 15th, I wanted to show you the impact on, this is slide 6, of what it's meant under a continuing resolution. Basically, Congress gives a daily proration of the $1.2 billion. Basically, 1/365th is what you get every day during a continuing resolution. And the first continuing resolution ended back in December 21st, of which we had received about $269 million. And of course, we know the shutdown lasted as long as it did, but now has been extended to February 15th. And then that gives us about $453 million. But Georgia DOT always tries to advance projects when they're ready, because the longer you wait, the more things cost, right? So federally, they let you do something called advanced construct or what I call simply pay it forward and get an IOU. And so to date, we've basically advanced constructed or IOU'd the federal government about $500 million of our state budget to get paid back when they pass the rest of this year's appropriation, which they will. And so, but we sort of got to a point where we couldn't pay it forward anymore, right? You can only give out you can only take so many IOUs before you run out of your own money. And so we got to that point, which meant in January we did in advance about $32 million of projects. In February, we were not able to bid out about $63 million in projects. And in March, this slide says about $130 million. We think the number, now that this is passed, is probably $40 to $50 million we can advance, because we're going to pay ourselves back first and foremost before we continue to use federal dollars with all our IOUs hanging out there. We want to sort of cash in our IOUs, if you will. The other impact is a little bit, won't be seen necessarily immediately, but during the shutdown, some of our regulatory agencies like Fish and Wildlife and those people that we work with to develop projects weren't at work, so some of our projects just got slowed down. A little bit of a hiccup that could have an effect. Don't know what that is yet. And then finally, just as a way of reminder, our rural transit operators who get reimbursed federally were not getting reimbursed during the shutdown. They are getting reimbursed now, and we're getting that going. But just to let you know that there has been an impact, optimistic, and hopefully a full year appropriations come forward, such that we don't have to have these conversations and that we can continue to deliver our projects as when they're ready and how we've promised to the public. Moving into the next slide, this sort of gets us back on track to how do we get to developing the 10-year plan. And I really like this slide of the funnel, if you will, because you have to marry up your state budget programs that we have, which are about 10 programs, with those federal programs, again, 11 or 12 federal programs. You got to marry that money up. You have to deliver the projects that come out of the State Transportation Improvement Program and also the Transportation Improvement Programs in your MPOs. And then by way of reminder at the very bottom is, again, we're subject to congressional balancing to ensure that there's equitable share of projects among our 14 congressional districts. So that's sort of the sieve, if you will, that you take your state dollars, your federal dollars, your planning process, and you look at congressional district balances, which sort of gets us into the 10-year plan makeup. And again, on slide 8, just remind you that there's a lot of planning that goes into developing projects that ultimately end up in the 10-year plan. And here's a whole list of them, obviously, that are there. There's no shortage of plans, if you will. There's always more projects that come out of plans than there are resources. And so we'll talk about one in particularly I want to talk about because of the actions that both House and Senate have taken to talk about the resolutions for talking about freight. And if you notice right there in the middle, we have a statewide freight and logistics plan, which I'm very proud to say that Georgia was one of the first states in the nation to have. And we did it before it was cool and federally mandated. It's now a federal mandate to have a freight and logistics plan, and we had one of those well in advance. So if you flip over to slide 9, again, just talk a little bit about what this means. That freight logistics plan is on the web, and there's several volumes of it, and I think it's on your thumb drive as well. There's several volumes of the freight and logistics plan. It was developed with stakeholder involvement going back really to about 2010 or so. And I mean, we had input from UPS, GP, CSX, Delta, Norfolk Southern, Georgia Motor Trucking Association, Home Depot, Ports Authority, Hartsfield Jackson, and the like. We had a lot of stakeholder input in developing a 2010 to 2050 plan. And so we just updated a little bit of it recently to be federally compliant. But in our freight and logistics plans, there's some neat things in there that I just want to bring your attention to and get you thinking about as you go forward. We have several corridor analyses with investment and impacts of how investment along freight corridors have a return on investment and what it means to the Georgia gross state product. So you really see a financial tie to any investment you have in a freight corridor. It has things like truck percentages along corridors and where the freight bottlenecks are. You all know where those are in your districts. I don't have to tell you. But sort of interestingly enough, it also shows you where the highest truck tons or how much freight by ton is moved through the state. And I bet you all would guess one guess for which county had the most freight movement in it. And what would that be? Everybody would guess Chatham, right? But somebody said Fulton. Who said Fulton? That's the right answer. Fulton's the right answer. It beats out Chatham just by, about 27% of all the freight tons are moved in Fulton, which shows you there's a little bit of a misnomer that all this freight's going around Atlanta. Well, Metro Atlanta is the consumer of freight, so a lot of it comes in. Chatham's second at 21%, but we got a lot of data in there just like that. And really, you can look at your county and see how much freights are moved in and out of your county. I'll remind you that about $790 billion of goods are shipped in and out of Savannah each year, and almost about 79% of that's on truck. So roadways are a big emphasis. And about 86% of the freight on trucks in and out of Savannah stay in Georgia. So think about that. So almost the majority of all the freight comes in and out of Savannah, we consume or export out of Georgia, which is really neat. But also, we have to think about the intermodal part of that, and this freight and logistics plan has an intermodal part to talk about rail and how critical rail is. And obviously, the ports are underway with their mega rail expansion project now that Norfolk Southern and CSX certainly benefit from, and we benefit from, because we can put containers on rail and not on trucks, which makes things better. But in conjunction to that project, we have delivered a project that rebuilds the bridge over a canal, and that will build a bridge over the railroad yard there for that expansion. And not only that, we have to think about the rail bridges or bridges over railroads such that the double stack containers can go through, such as right now we're working on 2 bridges to be able to design build projects to raise bridges in Macon, so that when this expansion is done in Savannah, that the double stack cars can get through. So it's this freight and logistics plan has a lot of detail in there. And I guess I'll just tell you that, the other thing we have is we have our own rail plan. We'll be updating that, but part of our budget ask in 20 is to fund some money in intermodal to do an assessment of all the railroad trestles out there in the bridges, so that we have a good database, that we know how much capital investment and what the condition of all the railroad bridges on the state-owned short lines. And so I tell you, we've got lots of plans coming together, and I want to just show you a few little graphs on these next slides very quickly that talk about freight. I love this one. I know it's a little bit small on your paper, but this map really shows the arteries of commerce across this nation. But what I want you to think about and look at what I-75 is. It's probably the thickest artery line out of the nation that's shown on this chart. And this shows how much freight is moved along the interstates, basically. And I-75 is certainly the freight artery of the South Atlantic. Most people think I-95 is, but it's really not. It's I-75. And so this, again, shows you, when you look at that little inset there on slide 10, you can see that it gets fatter as you get to Metro Atlanta, and as you get north of the city, it skinnies down a little bit. Again, shows that a lot of freight is being consumed here in Metro Atlanta. On slide 11, this is only Georgia-related freight flow. So this shows where the freight from Georgia comes and goes. And I remind you that Georgia's interstates connect to a third of the continental United States. So we connect over about 15 states across the nation with our interstates, which gives it great reach. And of course, what Georgia Ports Authority is doing with their expansion will make this map grow any further. Next, on slide 12, this is a really, again, neat map that shows you within 24 hours, where does the freight go when it leaves Savannah. And I'll remind you that Savannah Port moved 4.35 million TEUs, or those 20-foot containers, 4.35 million of those. 860,000 of those were on train. The rest of them were on roadways. But you just look at this map and then toggle to the next one on 13. That's 7 days. That shows where freight that basically comes from Georgia goes in 7 days. And you can see how much of the U.S. it covers. And I think this map especially does a good job of showing the need for additional interstate capacity and corridor capacity in Georgia, as well as replacing the original bridges and overpasses on the interstates. In fact, and this will come out as you go forward, I'm sure, over this next year, is there was a recent study commissioned by Congress to talk about what is the future of the interstate system. And in that, basically, study, it came out that said the nation is investing probably about 50% of what it should be investing just to sort of keep the state of good repair and keep things moving the way they should. That does not mean adding new lanes or new interstates or do any kind of expansion. So the nation is what they're looking at is we're investing about 50% of what we should, and that's probably true for Georgia as well. We're probably a little bit better than most. But, you know, it doesn't, I know there was a dialogue and a conversation yesterday, Chairman Beach, about I-14. You know, that doesn't contemplate expansion. We just know as a nation there needs to be more investment when you especially look at this map as it relates to freight. We estimate in Georgia that we have over, and this is a conservative number, over $11 billion of interstate needs. And I'll give you some examples, like widening Interstate 85 from Metro Atlanta to South Carolina, over $1.3 billion. It has a return on investment, though, of over 7 to 1 because of the freight corridor, which radiates north and east. And we have some projects underway to help that, but getting to South Carolina, again, $1 billion lift. Just replacing the bridges on the interstate that are all 60-plus years old now, it's about $3 billion. So you start looking at this, you can see that easily it adds up to significant investment. And this is no different from the rest of the nation. But as you think about freight and as you go forward, I think we think about these things, and especially the business model behind that of what's the return on investment and how important freight movement is. The study that was done for Congress came up with 10 recommendations, basically saying they need an additional $20 billion a year to keep up, and recommended 6 different funding proposals, of which I won't go into detail with. But it's a great study, and it shows the need. Next on slide 14 is just highlighting again the interstate freight investments or things that are in and around the interstate. And when you start looking at this list, it's pretty impressive. If you start it down in Savannah, just look at what we've done in recent years and what we're working on now. The last mile, which was about 3 miles of Jimmy DeLoach connector that connects right to the port gates, over $100 million into that project. Grange Road, which connects to one of their gates over to Jimmy DeLoach and over to State Route 21, was a $20 million job that just opened up last year. We're currently working on the Jimmy DeLoach extension over to I-16 that goes up over the railroad tracks and over US 80. And that project's the one the Undersecretary is going to visit on Friday and do a press conference there. And of course, we're under contract right now with I-95, I-16 reconstruction as well as the I-16 expansion, a $260 million design build project. So some tremendous impacts there. But you can look at all these projects on the slide. These are all things that are active or we are working toward, and you can see significant impacts there. But the interstate, as important as the interstates are, when you look back on that map a few maps ago, you saw fingers, those red arteries going all over this state where there's not interstates. And on slide 15, there you go, slide 15 shows you the investment that's going to be made on what's the freight, non-interstate freight corridors. A lot of these are the GRIP corridors. And just for instance, on this map shows really what we have underway over the next 10 years, which totals about $2.3 billion. And that's about 54 projects on 5 corridors, things like State Route 133 and US 1, State Route 17, finishing up US 84, 441, and parts of US 27. And just to give you some background, right now we have over $730 million of construction on these freight corridors that are either under construction or just opened in the last year. So again, we got to make a tremendous investment on these other corridors beside our interstates. In fact, that freight and logistics plan showed that there was a 4.2 to 1 return on investment for finishing up like State Route 133 and finishing up US 84 and finishing up 441, just to show you, again, there's a really good return on investment there. The next slide on 16 comes from the Atlanta Regional Commission's freight plan for Metro Atlanta. And when you look at these corridors, most of these corridors don't have any planned investment on them, and they're the major routes and arteries that run north, south, and east, west here in Metro Atlanta. And I'll just conclude sort of this derivation in the 10-year plan talking about freight with, I think we certainly look forward to being at the table going forward as the commission goes forward to provide data and input and be at the table to talk with community leaders and business leaders that we can synthesize all these plans, all this data into really a good business case that shows how important freight corridor is. And I applaud both Senate and House committees for taking this up and working on it over the next year. So sorry for the sidetrack there on freight, but I'm just really passionate about how important it is. So let's get back in a little bit to the 10-year plan and sort of what those components are from there. And my colleague Jay here will sort of pick it up and run with the fun part of the 10-year plan.
I'll let Russell try to catch his breath for a minute. Talking for a while. Yeah, go fast. Listen, it isn't good to be back in here with you today. I always enjoy coming before you. And we're glad to be back presenting this 10-year plan. As you can see here on this slide on number 17, it shows the different buckets or percentages of where we're supposed to put this: construction of new highway projects, maintenance of existing infrastructure, bridge repairs and replacement, safety enhancement, and administrative expenses. Those are the 5 areas that we're supposed to show you in our 10-year plan as we move forward. If you go to the next slide, number 18, we've already talked a little bit about the FAST Act and the federal process that comes down. We use that obligation authority through FY21, and then we've added a 1% growth out through the end, and that's what we're anticipating out through FY28. So that's where you'll see when we get to the 10-year plan, you look at those percentages, you'll see that we've grown that at 1%. We also have current and proposed TIFIA loans as well as Garvey as well. From the state side, we used the FY20 proposed. We've added a 3% growth there through the year through FY23, and then a 1% growth past FY23 in our calculations there, and we've used current and proposed GO bonds as well. This does exclude LMIG dollars, and most of you know what that is. That's your local maintenance and improvement grants to go out to your local governments. That's not in here, as well as intermodal as well. We'll move on to slide 19. The construction of new highway projects. You look at different project types that are included in here: widening 2 to 4 lanes, passing lanes, and et cetera. When we start looking at the widening projects, new locations is new roads as we look throughout the state of Georgia, as well as express lanes throughout. Funding sources, we have state, and then you also have the federal, and you can see these are some of the different buckets that come underneath that federal plan that the commissioners talked about earlier. Looking over, you will see a matrix that we created and how we look at scoring the projects. We presented this to you last year. It was something that we come up with that we had been working on. This is what we presented. As I said last year, this is a tool in the toolbox. This is not the end-all, be-all. This does not decide whether a project's programmed or not programmed, but it helps us to go back and look at to see where it scores based on other projects. And you look at volume to capacity there through the mobility and congestion side. Volume to capacity, we look at the level of service, then we look at the state route prioritization, and then we go down to the safety category, and then you see the different and the severity indexes there as well. And the other thing that was talked about last year that we like in here is the economic development side of things, because economic development is important. It means different compared to where you're at in the state. You know, we talk about up here about moving people, but down in our part of the state, in South Georgia and the rural parts of this state and the rural part of North Georgia, it's all about jobs. So economic development, we look at travel sheds and that economic impact there, and that's where you see some of those as well. But as we said last year, this is a living, breathable document. This is something that we'll continue to revisit and look at as we get more updated information as we move forward. Going over to slide 21, we're looking at the maintenance side of things. These are different project types, from capital maintenance and rehabilitation to routine maintenance, state route and interstates only that we look at from that side. And then you go back to your funding sources again. There's your state funding source as well as 2 other buckets that we look at. we want to look at the maintenance of existing roads and where we've been spending the money. If you can look at up there on chart, you can see that it's 28% on the low side. The critical side is 21%. High side is 25%. And medium's at 20%. So you can see the percentages that we use there when looking at the maintenance. We're going to have to get them bigger if my eyes don't get any better on our slides. Sorry about that. Moving over to page or slide 23 and bridge repair and replacements. And this really has become something for us that, as most of you that were here back when HB 170 was passed, one of the things that we really looked at and talked about was the bridges around the state of Georgia that were either in functionally obsolete, which meant they were these small bridges, narrow bridges. Probably most of you now drive a lot bigger cars than you did years ago. So we went back and we started putting a big emphasis on, to go off there for a minute, big emphasis on repairing these bridges, not only on our state system, but on the off-state system as well. Because you got a lot of local governments, especially in parts of the state, that cannot afford to go in there and repair these bridges. So one of the things through the bridge bonds that we've been able to do, this is a little different than here, but I want to really hit on that as well because of the bridge bonds. Important it is, we've been able to then take that money and spend on these off-system bridges around the state. And it's a great program for your local communities, your local counties and cities. We go in, we ask them to pay for half the right-of-way, we pay for the other half of the right-of-way, and we pay for the construction. So you've got a lot of bridges that are out there that are posted in rural Georgia, but we've put a big emphasis on bridges, and I think we've done a great job. But having said that, go back and look at the replacements, your capital maintenance and rehabilitation, your routine maintenance. And this is, like I said, that's where I talked about the local bridges as well. But it does not include our new bridges. And there's your different funding sources for there as well. Getting over to page 24. And I guess I skipped over a little bit here to this slide. But this is where we really start talking about the strength and structural capacity in all the bridges when we go out there and look at them as well. And we look at the different conditions that they're in, as well as poor or fair, and then we have the rehabilitation. It actually goes in and gives you an extra about 25 years of life if we can go in and rehab a bridge versus having to go in there and completely replace it. I'm trying to talk fast too. And here is on slide 25, bridge repair and replacements. You can see on system, 47 posted, the closed of 6,191 structure, or 1%. Off systems, 1,335 posted or closed of 8,601 structures, or 15%. So that's where you still see this off system bridges, but we are making that dent and we are helping those as well. Getting over to safety enhancement, on the next slide, the different project types. Look at them from the intersection improvement, operational improvements, quick response, which is a great program that you can get with your local districts on, safety hardware upgrades, tap enhancements, lighting, traffic management program like your HERO units and all, and our different funding sources there that we use for them again. To slide 27, we start talking about the safety and benefit cost scoring. We look at the number of crashes that are at a particular area, and we take those type of crashes and look at them, whether they were fatal, an injury, property, or damage only, and then we look at the crash reduction, crash modification factors as well. And we have the strategic highway safety plan identification that deals with our signal projects and looking at the age and condition of those, as well as our railroad crossing projects that we deal with. And I know that some of you call us and contact us from time to time about safety projects there at intersections where we have railroad crossings, whether it's from the bells and the whistles and the arms that's coming down. So those are some of the things, as well as the ITS projects. Turn administrative expenses back over to you.
Catch your breath.
Catch my breath.
So an admin part really consists of three main buckets. The biggest bucket is in our state budget of construction administration. That's all the things it takes to get a project out to be built. So the design, the environmental, buying the property, doing permitting, and all those kind of things. So that falls into there, as well as the construction administration of project management. Once a project's out for construction, we have to manage that project and close it out. It also, administration, we also capture the department admin, the general overhead, if you will, to run the agency in this. And we also include Jay in the planning division under departmental admin. So, and again, we use state and all the multiple federal fund sources we can to do that. But I give you some examples by our efforts. We outsource just about the majority of everything we do. Design is outsourced to about 83%, our last numbers. Right-of-way acquisition, appraisal, all those things, about 60% is outsourced. And construction management, out there managing the projects, about 70% outsourced. So we're, again, right under 4,000 full-time employees, so we outsource a good bit of this work. Next is what you see is the actual 10-year plan by fiscal year of these categories that Jay has gone over. And what you see is when you look at the percentage spend by category, you see that construction of new highways ranges from about a low of 44% up to a high of about 54% of all these categories. The maintenance range is around 22 to 27%, and if you sort of track on the totals across maintenance, you see that 27% this year, and it goes down to 22%. So the more we've invested in maintenance, you get things to a state of good repair, and then it doesn't cost quite as much to keep up with it. So it's, we're trying to get over that hump, and then it doesn't take quite as much as you can maintain. The bridge spend is 10 to 12%. It ranges between 10 to 12%, and again, that's bridge replacements and rehabilitation. That doesn't include new bridges. So if we build a new project that has a cross-country project that has a new bridge in it, we don't count that. That counts up under new construction, or the first category. And then safety, the pure dedicated safety categories Jay talked about range between 7 and 9%, but I suggest to you that every project we do has a safety benefit. I mean, every time we do something, even resurface a road, has a safety benefit because you get new stripes, new reflectors, and things like that. And admin rate ranges around 7 to 8%, which is pretty lean. Sort of industry standard just to administer projects is usually in the 10 to 12% range. So that looks pretty good. So that constitutes the breakdown by fiscal year, and you can see the break on state and federal. Josh, did you hand out the full sheet? Okay, we got a bigger sheet. Sorry, we got the full sheet size to hand out to show you that, so you can actually read it better than I can read it from my notes. The next slide is, again, sort of, if you take the 10-year plan and how we've been rolling along now, I guess this is the third year or so for 10-year plan. On slide 30, sort of shows you what this budget year and next budget year looks like graphically for work across this state, this great state. And you can see that there's colors just about everywhere. It totals, over the next 2 years, 615 construction projects totaling about $2.7 billion. And so this sort of gives you a graphic way to see, and I know as you get into Metro it gets a little jumbled up, but sort of see where the work is. And then on the next slide, 31, again, talk a little bit about our county investment, our accountability and investment report. Please pick that up, or if you don't have it, we can get you an extra copy. A wealth of information, but this highlights, again, sort of the work that's been done. And fiscal year 18, looking back last budget year, we bid out 296 projects. We awarded 258 of those projects, and the reason we didn't award all of those is if you bid something in May or June, it may go across the calendar year before, or the budget year before you award it. But those totaled a little over $1 billion. So we put basically $1.13 billion out in construction value. In FY18, we completed or opened to traffic 301 projects that totaled $1.37 billion of investment. And we have over 1,000 active projects going on today around the state with a value of $5.6 billion. So there's, when you see the cones and the barrels as you drive around, was over 1,000 projects out there that are underway. And not only those are the construction projects. Last budget year, too, we put out 1,446 contracts for professional services. As I talked about, the outsourced effort, that's for design, for right-of-way, for environmental, all those kind of things that total about $448 million. So as you can see, there's a big lift of work out there. On slide 32, just transition a little bit. If you don't believe us, here's a great report. ASCE puts out a report every so often that grades each state's infrastructure. Georgia was one of the few states that showed progress in gaining this year for their 2019 report. Just go Google that. It's done very well. It's an easy read. It talks about infrastructure, roads and bridges and dams and energy and the like, aviation. But we actually trended in the right direction, and ASC acknowledged GDOT in trending in the right direction. And then finally, the next slide is, again, the thumb drive. There it is. And lastly is for you and your staff. Use garoads.org if you want to find about a project in your district. Of course, you can always call Josh. That had already been advertised, and so Josh will give you his personal and home cell phone number. But GA Roads is a great website. You can put in your House or Senate district and pull a list of projects. You can export that into Excel or have your staff do that, and if you need any information. But of course, we're always welcome to entertain your questions, comments, or try to help you find any information on your projects. Chairman Tanner, Chairman Beach, that concludes a very lengthy, robust discussion, and we'll be glad to entertain any questions or comments.
All right, I'm sure we're going to have a few questions. A couple of just comments, or at least to get you to make a statement I think this committee would like to hear. The Express Lane project, which has been a very successful project thus far around the Atlanta area. The new corridor you opened on 75 North, I believe around 35-mile stretch. You've gotten some initial numbers back on the decrease in wait time during rush hour for people both using the express lane and folks who choose to stay in the existing lanes. Can you just tell us real briefly what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So the Northwest Corridor, I-75, 575, building those express lanes that are reversible into town in the morning, out in the afternoon, what we're seeing is a win-win. So the people that are using the express lanes are saving 30 to 45 minutes easy one way during the peak time, during the busiest of busiest time. So they're getting an hour or more of their day back, and we're continuing to get accolades for that. But the other win is the general purpose lanes. For the people that are not using express lanes, both north and southbound is seeing a 10 mile an hour to 15 mile an hour increase at the worst of the worst times. And the time of congestion has been lessened by an hour every day. So from the onset of when congestion builds and the travel time, there's really truly a win-win. And tying that back to freight, that is an extremely busy freight corridor. The top end at 285 and 75 right there is amazing. So seeing tremendous growth there. Over 2 million vehicles have been through that already, and the number's continuing to grow. So it's been a real success story, and we, again, plan to deploy that same mentality and method around 285, and the next project will actually be up Senator Beach's area, up 400 will be our next project that we deploy, but really has made a tremendous difference in mobility.
And those of us who commute on 400 appreciate that. The other thing I was going to mention, too, if for the legislators who maybe were not in the presentation we did at the biannual, you did a study jointly with Carl Vincent last year on the effects of House Bill 170 on the economy and downstream. Very successful. It was about an 8-9 month study. I believe that study's also on your website, so I encourage legislators to go take a look at that so you can see that the multiplier is just under 2. I believe it's around 1.9 return on investment, but I encourage you to take a look at that study. All right, I believe Chairman Setzler.
Thank you, Chairman Tanner, Commissioner. Great having you here. I wanted to address a similar thing that Chairman Tanner raised on the express lanes. The express lanes up 75, and the termination point on Hickory Grove Road is in my house district. And I just want to share with you anecdotally, I had a constituent come that was one of the critics as the project was sort of being planned and rolling out. They came to me and they said, I was criticizing this. I said all kind of bad things about it. They said, the project is life-changing. This is a person whose commute went from 45, that they didn't time it exactly, so their average commute was about 50 minutes. And they started timing their commute exactly now that they have the express lanes. It went down to 17 minutes. Wow. They lived up in the Kennesaw-Ackworth area, and they commute down to Terrell Mill Road. And they said, as a critic, it was absolutely life-changing. Wow. I just want to be very clear about that. And I was obviously a huge supporter of it all along, but the win-win, I mean, we have seen a dramatic change in the free lanes. And I think I would also say to you, it is a win-win-win, because when you think about, all these discussions of the massive investments in transit infrastructure, the buses that use those lanes now are no longer stuck in rush hour traffic. So it's a win-win-win that instead of spending $1 billion for an alignment for transit, we've got paid for by single vehicle operators. We've got this 20-something mile alignment that buses now can get in and run at speed limit rides. It's just that's been overlooked, and that literally becomes a free transit infrastructure because it's paid for by someone who's not riding the transit. So I wanted to thank you for that. I know we've spoken some about doubling down, putting that around the perimeter, and I can tell you from critics, they've come to me and said I was a critic before, and the response is everything from strong support to literally the word was life-changing. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Chairman. And I really appreciate the comment about transit because you're right, it is a win-win-win. And, their schedules are messed up now. Everybody's getting here too quick, So I'm not sure if Cobb and Greta's adjusted their schedules, but that is actually our notion going forward on these systems of express lanes is that they're basically a transit corridor. And what we're doing on 400, again, last year with the $100 million in transit bond money, so thank you for that, is being deployed on that corridor so that it sets up an opportunity for transit along that corridor using the express lanes. So again, not having to build a separate set of infrastructure for transit to use, but have a potential for high-capacity transit, being bus rapid transit or basically like a train on rubber tires, to pull into potential station locations that are all obviously predicated on a referendum by Fulton County and MARTA to make that investment. But we're working that hand in glove so that we are looking for the transit opportunities going forward as well, because it is a tremendous benefit. You pay, it doesn't matter what the price of the express lane is, you just pay your one fare and you got a reliable, guaranteed quick trip. It doesn't get any better than that.
Mr. Chairman, I raise that because I know there's a lot of, there's a lot of discussion about, multi-$100 billion alignments. And when you've got something that's paid for by automobile passengers that costs zero in a transit investment, it simply gets to just jump in the lane and use it. I just think, and you're talking about a 65-mile-an-hour ride. It's not even a slower ride. It's a game changer. That's from Cobb's perspective. Having looked at the 2012, TIA and some $2-3 billion investment along that corridor. Now that we have this, again, paid for by people who are automobile. I mean, me and the gentleman from Whitfield use it every day. It's almost. It's hard to believe the financial viability of it, how it's been so beneficial.
Thank you for that.
So thank you for that.
Thank you. Representative Carpenter,
Yes, is that right?
you should be up.
22?
Yep.
We there? All right.
I can hear you.
Anyway.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm a big Peach Pass fan. Can you walk me through a little bit of education on bridge rehabilitation? So a typical bridge, is it 60 years kind of life? And is that right?
Yeah.
And then versus when you rehab it and you get 25 more years out of it, what's the cost analysis on that? So is it a third versus building a new one? Or?
Yeah, so around rehabilitation, rehabilitation can mean many things, and usually what you find is that the supports are okay, but it's the riding surface and what we call the superstructure that needs to be rehabilitated. Often the deck surfaces have to come down, and then we take the concrete off and put the concrete back. So you get again a 25-year or more lifespan out of it. And the average bridge life originally designed, and you have to think back, this is complicated, when bridges back in the 40s and 50s were designed, the vehicles were much different back then. We didn't have tractor trailers that we have today and heavy vehicles. So they weren't ever designed to hold up those heavy loads. And that's why you have a lot of the bridges that are posted like that map shown. So what we try to do is rehabilitate them to bring them up, to give them some more strength and get more life out of them, because I don't have the number off the top of my head, sort of the what relationship it is. But if you can get 25 years more out of them, the average bridge age in Georgia is about 47 years old. That's average. And most of them are only designed to last 50. And so you can see that we're halfway there to be in that design life. As we design bridges now, we design them for obviously much heavier loads and for a longer life. So we try to get 100 years out of them now. So, But that's back, again, it's a sort of evolution of vehicles and weights and all those things changes it. But anytime we can rehab those, and I've got the number, I have to look back. We have rehabbed since fiscal year 16 tremendous amount of bridges, and again, buying us more time so that we can replace them. See if I I'll get to you. But again, we try to do that because replacement is very costly and timely and very impactful.
Chairman Beach.
Commissioner, great presentation. One of the things you said in your presentation was, I think you're outsourcing about 80% of your work. And I remember when I went on the GDOT board 14 years ago, we had over 10,000 employees. And I think when I left 7 years ago, we were about 6,500. And I think I heard you say today you're at 4,000.
That's correct.
Is there a point where is there a breaking point where you've got it? I mean, you can't lose any more employees. You can't, I guess you could outsource everything and you could just be the commissioner and not have any employees, but you've got to have some folks. I mean, are you getting a little concerned about we're at that point where we got to make sure we're staffing folks on the GDOT team?
Yes, good question. We certainly are at that point. We need to maintain a minimum of 4,000 just to be able to respond in emergencies. Just like last week with the impending weather, that requires us to bring people out of South Georgia up to the South Georgia districts to come be able to respond on a 24-hour basis, and if you have to go into extended work. So we need to maintain that 4,000, and about half of our staff are our maintenance operations people, the men and women out there working on the roadways each and every day, taking care of maintenance and keeping the roads up and doing all those things. And that's who you rely on in emergency situations. You can contract for some of that, but you just absolutely can't contract for those kind of things. So our mission is to really recruit highly talented people, get them exposed as quickly as we can so that they can, again, manage and look out for the state's, protect the state in contracting and making sure that, the state's getting what it's paying for. And getting good quality, so that's very important. But we're at that point now. That's where we need to be. We can't afford to be any lower. And we actually sort of hit a dip got down to about 3,800, and we're sort of pulling back up and trying to maintain right around 4,000. Maybe 4,200 would be optimal if nobody quit and nobody got fired and nobody retired. We'd be at 4,200, but you always have that churn. And
Right.
In fact, last year, I think we had again about 4,000 employees. And we had almost 800 new hires last year, so that's a big churn. And so we got to slow the churn down, so we'll have people with institutional knowledge.
Yeah. That's it.
And following up on that, have you ever looked internally at having your design folks internally versus when you do outsource that, the efficiency of that versus your folks doing it or someone else? Have you ever looked at that? As the project come in less expensive when it's outsourced or when you do it internally?
Yeah, Chairman, tough question. We certainly look at it and we make evaluations on every project if we're going to do it in-house or outsource it. And some of that comes into complexity. We like to keep some complex projects in-house so that we build that knowledge, but sometimes the complexity requires specialty designers and things that we need to outsource. The efficiency of that is hard to say because every project is so unique, and I like to say that every project's got a story. It starts and stops, or whatever happens with it. So it's really hard to get a comparative analysis. We do plan, though, to try to work going forward to do an analysis of state-funded versus federally funded. We are seeing significant gains when we can just apply state funding to the design, right-of-way, environmental, and construction. We still have to follow every permit, every federal law that requires permitting, but we're seeing efficiency. We're trying to document that. We think it's probably 20 to 30% time savings and cost savings. So that's tremendous. We're not critical of federal dollars. We certainly need them. But again, if we're trying to get that kind of information too to be able to share with both House and Senate committees. That's good information, and then maybe that informs how do we continue to be strategic going forward. One of the proposals, I'll address just a minute, was from the president 2 years ago was if the federal share is subordinate, less than 50%, then maybe the federal rules don't apply. And that would be a wonderful thing. Then you could leverage your state and federal to do things more quickly and more cost effectively. And again, without having any harm to environment or any, shortcutting anything. You still have to follow all the state laws and federal laws. You just get some of the bureaucracy out of the way.
All right, 25.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Just thank you for being here. As a freshman, I'm still fairly learning, and I appreciate Chairmans Beach and Tanner to kind of help me get a better abreast of it. My district, 111, I'm sure most of you all are familiar. If you're coming up from the south, you might come to a kind of a slow crawl going around Henry County. And I know a lot of residents, while they've expressed appreciation for those express lanes, especially, as you know, going through the holiday season, being able to make that easy commute straight on into Florida, where they're still able to use the lanes. I've spoken to some folks over at Norfolk Southern as well as the Georgia Chamber. They seem to be really, it seems to be some really promising projects that are on the way to help alleviate some of that highway traffic via rail. I just want to know if maybe you could maybe shed some light on that.
Well, certainly the mega rail expansion down at the port certainly does that and gives Norfolk Southern and CSX the ability to move more freight on rail, as well as Georgia Ports Authority's expansion of the intermodal yards in Murray County, announcement in Hall County, and of course the original in Cordele, which gives ability to get that freight off the road and onto rail, which is again advantageous to us. We love that. It makes our life a little easier. Right. In and around Henry County, though, too, a couple things brewing is obviously a potential intermodal yard there that's been discussed south, right around 155 in that area. Exactly. And that ties in again back to our freight conversation. Is one of our major projects we have is to build truck-only lanes from Macon into Henry County, and we're trying to figure out, we'd love to get to 675, don't know if that's quite attainable, but to dedicate lanes for freight movement only and separate the cars, because what we see is the trucks are about 14% of crashes, but almost 25% of fatalities involve a tractor trailer. So if you can get those trucks over there and get them moving, and then you have such thing as the Industrial Development Authority and the things that are being contemplated down in Henry County a little bit south of where freight is, it repurposes where that freight is. So I think it's a lot of good things, and I would throw out just to you on I-75, we have a project ready to go this year, which is changes things. It's not in Henry County, but in Clayton, and it's basically adding northbound lanes to 75 at 285 right there at Forest Park in the farmers market, gotcha, where trucks always turn over, and that's one of your first bottlenecks is everybody that comes in every morning that's coming up. That's where you get you start bottlenecking in that area all the way into town. So again, that will certainly help that bottleneck. So a lot going on, and again, our two Class 1s as well as our short line railroads play an important and critical role in moving freight for the state.
Well, in the new interchange that's being looked at there at Bethlehem Road. Okay, right. That's being looked at now as well. So y'all got a lot going on in Henry County, and trust me, I'm one of the ones that drive back and forth through there all the time. I like those express lanes. Yeah, that's good.
All right, that looks like all the questions. Again, just a reminder, you have all the information on your thumb drive. It's a lot of information. Like the commissioner said, I encourage you not to try to read it all at one time. But take this with you. If you have any questions, just get with us, get with Josh. Be glad to answer them, and we'll take one more question, and then we will adjourn and turn it over to Chairman Beach. Chairman Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just the voting on the 10-year plan, we saw, I think it's a fantastic PowerPoint, and I love some of the charts you guys were able to present. What is the actual thing that we're voting on? What is the document that represents the 10-year plan?
According to House Bill 170, they have to present the percentages of how the money's going to be spent, and that is on this handout. It's not a list of specific projects, although on the thumb drive you will find projects listed and when they're anticipated to be constructed on the 10-year plan. But what required in House Bill 170 is the percentages. Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be a troublemaker. Yeah. I'm just we're this is new to us. What is the sort of what is the binding nature of that? I mean, I know it's aspirational. We have an awesome relationship with GDOT. That's not in question. I'm just procedurally, what are we really voting? Are we voting that this is a minimum requirement? I mean, I'm not sure what it really means, I guess is my question.
You want me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, really what it is, yeah, I guess I wrote it, I know. There were several guys in there that wrote it, but, actually what it is if y'all adopt this, you're to send it to the to the Appropriations Committee, and then they're to look at it and take it into account when looking at developing the budget. So that's really what it is for y'all to give, some kind of guidance to the Appropriations Committee through this 10-year plan.
In the percentages, I mean, because obviously the percentages are, well, let me ask it this way. Are these percentages of dollars?
Yes.
Okay. So that this kind of informs line items across these different categories?
Yeah, dollars
And
and
are-
investments in there.
And are we that specific in the appropriations process now, that we're line items in these kind of categories? Or, and is that a good, is that good, or do we want to give you guys some more flexibility? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say what these percentages do are representative of the programs, the state programs, of which the main ones here are capital construction, capital maintenance, a little bit of local roads administration, which is a state budget program, as well as traffic management, and then those are admin. So they do correlate. And it's not a direct correlation because not everything is included as described by law. But it is a great correlation of these are where the dollars are going, and the percentages, when you look at on that sheet, you got a state column and a federal column. There is a correlation there. So you have each year there's a state, federal percentage, and then the total percentage, and they are of dollars, not by project count. So I think it's a pretty good correlation. It's very hard to connect dot to dot.
Yeah.
But it I think for both House and Senate committees is, hey, you're informed that this is where the dollars are being spent, and it makes sense, it's reasonable. There's all the other planning documents that support how you got to that project, sort of this project list, which is by category. So I do think they connect, even though it's not a direct correlation, because there's other things in our state budget that are not line itemed out, and we would not really prefer for that to happen. We'd be here another couple hours.
And I also think one of the main reasons that was put in 170, and Jay, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was a general concern that we didn't want the administration and the staff to grow and the dollars not actually be spent where those of us that were involved in House Bill 170 wanted it to go, which was actually building roads, maintaining roads, and repairing bridges.
You're absolutely correct.
So, all right. Well, I think that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Beach to close us out.
Well, thank you, Chairman Tanner, and thank you, committee, for being here, and thank you all for the presentation. You did a great job, in depth, and learned a lot, and we're here to support you, and we're here to help you, and just keep getting orange barrels out there and put shovels in the dirt and build some roads. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.